Hello, welcome to Machine Learning Summit. My name is Pinar Yilmaz. I'm a software engineer in the AWS Deep Engine team. Today I'll be talking about how to understand your machine learning models better with greater visibility and transparency. So today we're going to be talking about what is bias and explainability in machine learning and how we can address these in Amazon SageMaker Clarifai. What are the features that will help us to do so? And we'll show that with a demo at the end. So today, during machine learning development, first step is to clean up the data and explore the data for different aspects, and then start the model training. And during this model development phase, the bias can creep in either inside of the data or through the model training phase. So it's important to understand the bias characteristics of the data as well as the model. And once we deploy this model in production, we also need to provide visibility and monitor the model as it's serving live inferences for our production use cases appropriate for our business. And it's also important to provide visibility and monitor these aspects on an ongoing basis for both internal and external stakeholders. For regulatory purposes, there might be also compliance requirements that we will need to produce on an ongoing basis to understand how these models make those predictions and if they comply with the local laws and regulations. So how do we define bias? Bias is broadly defined as imbalances in the samples or predictions across different groups. So this applies to the dataset, where the dataset might have imbalances in the samples or the labels that are existing in the training dataset. Or once we train the model, we might find that the model predictions also contain imbalances across different groups. We define a sensitive group as one of the features in our dataset that includes the sensitive attributes for our samples. And certain values in those feature attributes will designate those samples as sensitive, and therefore we define our sensitive groups that way. So in the machine learning lifecycle, bias and explainability is important at each and every step. During the build time, when we're building the models, we would like to conduct bias analysis during exploratory data analysis. And also after training, we want to understand the bias and explainability characteristics for the trained model as well as the dataset again. And once we deploy, we also want to be able to understand the individual inferences for models in production and monitor these aspects over time. How do we do this? If we were to do this from scratch, using existing tools available to us, we would have to first pick a method and algorithm. And the research is ripe with different approaches. So for example, for explainability, there are approaches based on feature permutations, ablations, saliency masks, and for deep learning models, there are gradient-based and neuron activation-based approaches. So once we identify which approaches or algorithms that we want to use, we would have to piece together different open source packages, write custom code to glue all of them together, and this is a typically multi-step and complex workflow. It's highly manual and error-prone. So SageMaker Clarifai is addressing all of these with the following features. With SageMaker Clarifai, you can detect bias during data preparation, detect bias in trained models, explain overall model behavior, individual predictions, and also continue to monitor these over time and provide reports to auditors or internal or external stakeholders. How do we do this? SageMaker Clarifai is integrated broadly into SageMaker. So in Data Wrangler, you can run a bias report. In processing jobs, you can run a Clarifai processing job to identify the bias and explainability metrics anytime for pre-training or post-training. And also, it is integrated into Model Monitor so that we can continue to monitor these aspects in production. We do this by providing APIs to be able to run these at any time, or even through an automated workflow such as SageMaker pipelines. And we also provide open source core libraries for bias detection. So these libraries and how it integrates into SageMaker is bundled inside SageMaker Clarify, and it's provided as an API that you can use. We also provide high-level abstractions to make it easier to configure inside SageMaker Python SDK. You can use this through AWS SDK or CLI, or through Studio, or through SageMaker Notebook instances, for example, and even run it on a local machine if you wish. So let's hear from some of our customers. Zopa is a UK-based digital bank. They use SageMaker Clarify to explain the model behavior so that they can understand how this model arrives at its predictions and drive confidence in terms of the model behavior so that they can be sure that the model is picking up on the right attributes that aligns with the business initiatives and also domain expertise. Varo is a US-based digital bank, and they also use SageMaker Clarify to explain and increase the transparency of the machine learning models. Bundesliga is an organizer of German soccer leagues, and they use SageMaker Clarify to understand how different factors impact how the chances of achieving a goal in any position. So they use 16 different factors to understand the probability of achieving a goal, and SageMaker Clarify allows them to understand which factors contribute to that decision. SageMaker Clarify is generally available today, and it's at no additional cost. Basically, you pay for the amount of time you use for the processing jobs or the reports that you generate. And SageMaker Clarify is also available in all the regions where SageMaker is available. So let's go ahead with a demo, and we'll start by showing you how to run a bias report in Data Wrangler. Data Wrangler is SageMaker's feature to understand and explore the data and make transformations on the data and also run analyses on the data. So in Data Wrangler, you can run a bias report to get the bias metrics for a training dataset before you train. So first, we import the dataset, and in this case, we're going to use an open source credit score dataset, and we're going to import this dataset as a source, and then we're going to run an analysis on it. This will be a bias report analysis type, and we're just going to plug in some of the values in the form. First, we have to designate what is the target attribute in this dataset. In this case, good credit attribute is the label or target attribute that we're trying to predict. And the value of 1 corresponds to a positive outcome, meaning that individuals having good credit equals 1 are designated as positive outcome to be determined by this model and dataset. So for the sensitive group, we pick age and a threshold of 40. So individuals older than 40 will be designated as the sensitive group. And once we run the report, we see the pre-training metrics produced as part of the report. And we can explore these reports in the visual interface. In the drop-down menus for each metric, you can find examples, descriptions, and resources, links to further reading if you wish to. And you can also see the metric values in the table. We can create this report and save it, and this will be part of our dataset analysis. Next, I'm going to show you how to run a SageMaker Clarify processing job. And you can run this anytime in pre-training, post-training, or with any individual inferences that are collected, or with training or test data set. So what we're going to do is run this in a notebook. I'm using SageMaker Studio here, but as I mentioned, you could run it anywhere. First, we're going to create a processor using the SageMaker processor interface in SageMaker Python SDK and set up the inputs and outputs for this job. One of the inputs is the analysis configuration that contains the parameters for different algorithms and their configurations. And once we run this job, what we're going to see is a JSON report that contains the raw metrics, as well as an HTML and a PDF report. So these will be placed in the job output location in S3, and you can download and inspect them on the notebook. And also use different plotting mechanisms to understand and explore the metrics inside the notebook. Note that the computation has already happened, and we're only going to be plotting some of these values inside the notebook. For explainability, the explanations come in the form of feature attributions, and we use kernel-SHAP algorithm to compute these attributions. And we can use different open source libraries. In this case, we're using the SHAP library to plot the global and the individual Shapley values computed for each of the samples in our dataset. We can also find enhanced visualizations in SageMaker Studio. So if we go to Experiments and Trials and locate our processing job as a trial component, we can open up the Describe Trial Component tab, and in there, we'll be able to see the explainability plots as well as the bias metric reports in the bias tab. So in here, you'll see that there are more metrics now, because when we configured the Clarifai processing job, we also provided the model that we trained earlier. And now we have access to pre-training as well as post-training metrics. So these metrics all have different ranges, and they explore the dataset and model from different aspects. One rule of thumb to use is the closer the value of the metric is to 0, the lesser the amount of bias detected by that metric. The metrics do have different ranges, so I encourage you to explore and understand the metrics in more detail, and you can find those information in the drop-down menus. Next, I'm going to show you how we monitor the live endpoints once the models are deployed to production. So in SageMaker Model Monitor, we create an endpoint and we enable data capture on that endpoint. This allows Model Monitor to be able to use the captured datasets, captured inferences, to run processing jobs, and we're going to be actually using the same processing job that we run as a offline job earlier, and Model Monitor will run this on the schedule that we indicated. So to find out what these metrics indicate and how the endpoint behaves over time, we can locate it in the endpoint section in SageMaker Studio and open up the model monitoring report. And in this report, there will be a bias and an explainability section. So if we look at the explainability section, we can see how the feature attributions change over time. So we can plot these in different ways. We can look at the differences of the ranks of the feature attributions from one job to the next. And we can also see how the rank of a particular feature changes over time. So you can select different chart options and plot them on the fly in SageMaker Studio. So the idea here is that the feature attributions should not be varying wildly over time. It should be relatively stable. So if you find that the model is basing the decisions on entirely different features from how we started off with, that might indicate that the real-world conditions are changing, and it might be time to retrain or relabel the data. Similarly, when we go to the bias section, we see the bias metrics computed over time. And if the metrics are also change widely or cross thresholds, these will be indicated as issue found in the monitoring status. And we can also plot different metrics and see how they change over time. And the idea here is that they should not be varying wildly, and they should remain under predefined thresholds, predefined as part of the monitoring configuration, so that we can be rest assured that the model is not crossing the bias thresholds that we set it up for. This interface also allows us to explore different aspects, as in different sensitive groups, and we can explore the pre-training as well as post-training metrics from this interface by selecting different chart options. So to recap, SageMaker allows you to detect bias during data preparation, detect bias and explain your models, and also allow you to explain individual inferences and understand the global model behavior as well, and be able to monitor all of these aspects once the model is deployed to production. Here are a few of resources that you might find interesting and useful. We have a white paper that explains our approach and gives further information about the background. And our SageMaker Clarifai library is open sourced. You can also find different blog posts together with our customers and also including different use cases and applications. For example, an end-to-end demo that includes how to use SageMaker in SageMaker Clarifai in SageMaker pipelines. We also have our developer guide, a lot of extensive documentation available, and lots of example notebooks to help you get started, including a workshop that includes Clarifai as part of the whole machine learning workflow. If you would like to continue your learning, we have also different training and certification resources. You can find all of these links here in this slide. This concludes our presentation today. Thank you so much. See you next time.